You have 20 seconds left to live, and you know it. Not a guess, not a fear. You know. What does your brain actually do in that moment? Science has the answer, and it's nothing like what you've been told. Welcome to Obscura Files. If you're new here, hit subscribe. We break down the stuff that keeps you up at night, and today is no exception. Let's get into it. Most people assume that knowing you're going to die feels one specific way, a dramatic moment of clarity, maybe peace, maybe terror. But here's the thing, it doesn't work like that. Your brain reacts completely differently depending on how long you have left. Months, minutes, or seconds. Each one triggers a completely different version of your mind. And understanding those differences changes the way you think about life, death, and the strange machine running inside your skull. So let's go through all three. First scenario. You find out you're dying, but you still have time. This is the hospital room version. A doctor sits down, chooses their words carefully, and tells you that your time is limited. Maybe it's cancer. Maybe it's organ failure. Maybe it's a progressive disease with no cure. However it's framed, the message is the same. You are going to die, and there is a date somewhere in the future with your name on it. Now, here's what people expect to feel in that moment. Acceptance, maybe even some kind of spiritual peace. What actually happens is the total opposite. The brain doesn't activate calm. It activates denial. Hard, immediate, almost violent denial. You hear the words, but you don't process them. Not really, because your mind is running interference. It's blocking the information before it can land. And this isn't weakness. This is neurobiology doing exactly what it was built to do, protecting you from emotional pain so severe it could shut you down completely. Think about it this way. The brain treats catastrophic emotional news the same way it treats physical trauma. It numbs first, asks questions later. And here's something I want to ask you directly, because I think your answer says a lot about how you see yourself. If a doctor told you tomorrow that you had 6 months left, what's the first thing you'd do? Not what you think you should do, what you'd actually do. Drop that in the comments. I'm genuinely curious, and I'll be reading every single one. Back to the science. After denial comes the slow grind, because this scenario, the slow death, is a biological process that unfolds over weeks and months. And the body does things that look disturbing from the outside, but make complete sense from the inside. The person starts sleeping more, not because they're giving up, but because the brain is rationing energy. It's making executive decisions about what systems to keep running and what to let go. Consciousness is expensive. Sleep is cheap. The skin changes. It gets cold at the edges, sometimes mottled with patches of color, because the body is redirecting what little circulation it has left toward the core organs. It's triage, the body abandoning the outskirts to protect the center. Breathing becomes irregular, long pauses, deep, labored sounds that people around the dying person often mistake for suffering. But doctors who specialize in end-of-life care are clear about this. Those sounds are physiology, not pain. The body working through its final mechanical processes. Then come the conversations with people who aren't there. Someone calls out a name no one recognizes, or speaks to a person who died 20 years ago. And families sometimes see this as something mystical, a message from the other side. But neurologically, what's happening is much simpler and somehow even more fascinating. The brain is running out of oxygen and losing its ability to separate memory from present reality. Old images, old voices, old faces, they start bleeding through because the filter that keeps them separate is breaking down. Eventually comes unconsciousness. The person stops responding. But here's something that matters, something worth knowing if you've ever sat with someone at the end of their life. Hearing is one of the last senses to go. They may not be able to respond, but they can still hear you. The body enters something close to a coma state. Breathing spaces out, gets quieter, and then stops.
What's striking about this version of death is that by the end, the dying person often isn't experiencing fear or peace. The brain is too depleted to generate either. It simply powers down, like a phone that ran out of battery. Not dramatic, not loud, just off. But that's only one version of knowing you're going to die, and it's completely different from what happens when the timeline collapses to minutes. Scenario 2. You have minutes, and there's no way out. This is not a hospital. This is a plane at 30,000 feet that suddenly starts doing things planes should never do. An explosion, a violent shudder, oxygen masks dropping from the ceiling, the aircraft tilting at an angle that makes your stomach drop completely out of your body, people screaming, someone trying to call a family member who will never pick up in time.
The floor vibrating underneath your feet in a way that tells you something is very, very wrong. And in that moment, you know. Not a fear, not a maybe. You know there is no surviving this. So what does the brain do? Something that should be impossible. Something that has been documented over and over again by survivors of avalanches, car crashes, building collapses, falls from extreme heights. Something neuroscientists call paradoxical calm. The terror stops. Not fades. The amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for the fear response, essentially goes offline. And in its place comes something that sounds made up, but has been reported consistently enough that it can't be ignored. A strange, cold clarity. The world slows down. Details sharpen. Sound seems to drop away. And the person experiencing it describes a feeling of watching the scene from a slight distance, as if they've been gently removed from the emotional stakes of what's happening. This is not peace. Let's be very clear about that. This is your brain entering emergency autopilot. It's a state that evolved specifically to give you the clearest possible head in the final moments, even when those moments have no survivable outcome. Panic would burn through your last resources. Clarity at least keeps the options open, even if there aren't any real options left. This is why crash survivors, people who walked away when they shouldn't have, often say, "I wasn't scared. I don't know why." The brain decided fear was no longer a useful tool and switched it off, not to comfort you, to use you efficiently. And during this state, something else happens that gets reported constantly. Time distortion. The seconds stretch. A moment that lasts less than a minute feels like it contains 5 minutes of experience. Some people describe it as watching a very slow, very high-definition film of their own situation. Mental hyperclarity. Every detail of the seat in front of them, the pattern on the ceiling, the way light is coming through a cracked window, all of it impossibly vivid. There's a neurological explanation for this too. When the brain kicks into extreme survival mode, it processes information faster, more neural activity per second. And when you're processing more information per unit of time, time feels longer. It's not magic. It's processing speed. Now, what about the people who don't just come close, but actually cross the line? Because there's a third scenario, and this one is the strangest of all. Scenario 3. You die, and then you come back. Clinical death. A cardiac arrest that lasts long enough for the brain to start shutting down. A drowning. A surgical complication. The heart stops. The brain begins its final sequence. And then, for reasons medicine is still working to fully understand, it reverses. The person comes back. And what they describe is nothing like scenario 1 or 2. There's no denial. There's no paradoxical calm. What gets reported again and again, across cultures, across languages, across completely different circumstances, is a set of experiences so consistent that researchers had to take them seriously. Peace. Not relief, not the absence of pain, actual overwhelming oceanic peace,
that people struggle to put into words afterward. The sensation of leaving the body and watching it from above. A review of memories, not in order, but all at once, like someone took every moment of your life and spread it out in a single panoramic image. A picture of a bright blue sky, the ocean beneath them, the bright blue clouds, all of it impossible, intensely blue. A warm light at the end of a tunnel, or at the end of a stream. A feeling of knowing that something is coming, a wave, and that this wave is safe. It's safe to come. It's accounts that all read so similarly, regardless of the religion, belief, or background of the individual. And what about the accounts of time? For someone who is actually dead, for typically minutes, how can any of what they describe even be possible? Why do everyone who actually dies describe something different? Why do everyone who actually dies describe something different? Why do everyone who actually dies describe something different?
And the tunnel, the narrowing visual field with an intensely bright light at the center that people describe as warm rather than blinding. None of this is supernatural. All of it has a neurological explanation. The out-of-body experience happens because the brain loses its ability to sync up different streams of incoming information, visual, auditory, and proprioceptive, meaning the sense of where your body is in space. When those three streams fall out of alignment, the brain can no longer anchor your sense of self to a specific physical location, so it creates a viewpoint, an external one. You feel like you're watching yourself because your brain no longer knows where yourself actually is. The tunnel of light is hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, acting on the visual cortex. The visual cortex is one of the first systems to start failing when oxygen drops. Neurons begin firing erratically, chaotically, and the result is perceived as a narrowing field of bright light. It's not a doorway, it's a malfunction, a spectacular, awe-inspiring malfunction. The life review, every memory flooding at once, happens because the hippocampus, the brain's memory organizer, is collapsing. It normally keeps memories in chronological order, filed and tagged. When it starts to fail, those files scatter. The brain doesn't experience them as a flood of random images. It experiences them as a rapid, structured sequence, because the brain is still trying to make narrative sense of what's happening, even as the system breaks down. And the peace, that overwhelming, inexplicable peace, that one comes down to chemistry. As the brain approaches the edge of total shutdown, it releases a cocktail of neurotransmitters, endorphins, glutamate, and others, that essentially floods the emotional centers and kills the fear response. It's not enlightenment. It's the body's final chemical act, a kind of biological mercy. Here's the part that should make you stop for a second. All of these experiences, the tunnel, the peace, the memory flood, the out-of-body sensation, they only happen to people who come back. You can't experience the edge of death and report on it unless you return from it, which means everything we know about what dying feels like comes from people who didn't finish the process. We are, quite literally, only hearing from the survivors. The people who actually completed the crossing, they haven't filed a report. And that's where science hits its wall. We can describe, with remarkable precision, what happens to a body as it dies. We can explain the chemistry, the neurology, the sequence of failures and shutdowns and final signals. We can account for the denial, the paradoxical calm, the tunnel, the peace. We can explain all of it. What we cannot explain is what happens to you. Not the body, not the brain. You. The thing that reads these words and knows it's reading them. The thing that has opinions and fears and memories and a specific feeling it gets when it thinks about not existing anymore. We don't know what happens to that. Consciousness, in the deepest sense of the word, remains one of the hardest unsolved problems in all of science. We know it's generated by the brain. We don't know if it ends when the brain does. We don't know if there's something it's like to be dead, the way there's something it's like to be alive.
We genuinely don't know.
And maybe that's why this topic never gets old. The brain does everything in its power to keep you from confronting death. The denial, the calm, the chemical mercy at the end, all of it is biological machinery designed to keep you functioning. But something in you keeps asking the question anyway, keeps pulling at the thread, keeps wanting to know what's on the other side of that last second. The honest answer is, nobody knows. And that might be the most important thing science has ever admitted. What we do know is this: the way you spend the time before that last second is not a mystery. That part is entirely in your hands. And maybe that's the only answer that actually matters. This has been Obscura Files. If this made you think, share it with someone who needs to think too. And I'll see you in the next one.